Welcome back to part 2 of the Mazz Designs cheat code chassis build. So you can see here we left off part 1 with this fully built slider ready to go. So I'm going to do a quick rundown of what's on here before we get going any further. So front and rear, we've got plastic Little Guy Racing axles on there, so super wide track. Got brass differential covers on both of those. Got custom aluminum links from RC Steve 710 all the way around. So those are super nice, high clearance. Actually Z-linked as well, I think. Then we've got the NSD RC servo up front on Mofo RC's brass servo mount. Then I've got Mofo RC's Nano Beast V2 or 2.0 on the aluminum forward-facing Albins mount. And that's mated up to Hot Racing's overdrive transmission. And then I paired that with Hot Racing's oil-filled long travel shocks as well. And then just some brass knuckles on the front, brass hexes all the way around, and of course the titanium chassis rails from Mazz himself. So that's where we sit right now. So between part 1 and part 2, I did do a little bit of clearancing, tuning, I guess, on the chassis. So I think we're going to run through that before we get any further. Okay, so a few little clearancing and tuning tweaks I made between part 1 and now. First of which would be the hexes. And I think I mentioned this in part 1 that these hexes felt like they were going to be really tight against the bearing, and they were. So I took off most of the back spacing there. So you can see this pin is fairly close. Get that bearing in there. So that allows that hex to fully seat, and you tighten the wheel and the nut down, and it's not just compressing this backspace piece against the bearing and locking everything up. So that's usually the source of that wheel bind. It's just making sure that, you know, this hex doesn't touch anything when it's fully tightened against that pin, and you should have no binding. So that takes care of the wheel and axle binding. I was having a little clearance issue, and I mentioned this too. This tray comes in contact with the drive shaft and the 2 upper links when I was trying to get up here to full compression. And I said I probably wasn't going to attack that with the Dremel since this thing costs so much, but it took me about 2 minutes to change my mind. So I did bring out the Dremel and put it to work here, clearanced out, and I'll show some photos of that. But now I get, boom, full travel, get right up in those frame rails where I wanted to be. So getting everything out of my shocks that I wanted, the same on the front. I moved this body mount forward 1 screw hole, and that was to get these magnets and I guess the glue from the body side that'll be on those away from the line of that clear windshield that'll be here. So I wanted to pull that forward. In doing that, that gave me a little clearancing issues with the servo, which you can see now that I've solved those. I'm getting all the way down with my suspension. So this servo has this really big grommet and side exit wires. So that was the culprit right there. And you can see I did have to get the Dremel and clearance out a little bit of this. To allow for that. So now it gets right up in there. You still kind of have to squeeze this wire and really kind of tuck it to route it, you know, get it bent that way, but that seems to give me adequate clearance there, no problem. So from there we're moving forward with a fully functional, fully clearanced, no binding at all anywhere chassis. So very happy with that, and these oil shocks feel really, really smooth. So I think now I'm going to give you a little quick look at the body work and paint work that went on before we jump into the new parts. Wasn't a ton of paint work or body work, but I did have to do quite a bit of tire fitting, different tire sizes, different wheels to figure out the cut of that body. But once I got that down, the painting went pretty easily. So sit back and I'll run through, catch you up on that. All right, now that you're caught up on the paint and body work, let's take a quick look at the parts that are remaining here. So, of course, we've got wheels and tires, and we're going to get into those in a little more detail later on. Of course, I've got some alternates lined up to look at as well. I picked up the billet front axle housing for the Super 8 axle. I ran into a few issues with fitment and the servo tray with that plastic housing, so I just wanted some peace of mind, so we're going to swap this one in. For the electronics, I've got the Lizard Pro, and I've got the micro 4-channel receiver for the FlySky, and then an 8.4 volt BEC to pump this guy up, and then a 3S balance lead that I need to convert. This has a 2S that it comes with. And then speaking of 3S, I finally got my little mini battery in that I was waiting on. This 300 milliamp hour. So this should fit nicely either on the side tray or on that back tray. And then I got my springs out just in case for tuning. I may want to drop the ride height a little. We'll see once we get it all set up. And then for some scale detail, I picked up these Endura scale hubs. I've had these for a while, so I figured I'd throw those on there just to dress it up a little bit. And then of course, I've got a few little surprises as well planned. So I think the first thing we're going to do is go ahead and swap out this front axle housing and be done with the chassis. Okay, got the front end torn apart, got both these axle housings sized up next to each other, and you can see here on this servo tray on the bottom, I've left the double-sided tape that was basically acting as a shim, and that was riding across the top of the diff right here, taking up any wiggle. And that's because these holes are a little bit oversized, so the long screws can kind of wiggle in there. And then when you've got the servo mount attached, it's got the bracket on each side, but these are a little bit narrow, so it's still allowed for a little wiggle. So that shim solved it. And looking at this metal one, from test fitting, these holes aren't any smaller, so the screw can still wiggle within that, but the width of these is a little bit bigger than these guys. So that takes out some of that slop. It just won't allow the tray to move backwards and forwards when you fit it on there. So I think I'm going to go ahead and leave the shim in there, but everything lines up nicely, and because those are wider, it already doesn't want to rock as much. Of course, once I get the other half and the screws through there, it should really snug it down. But not a huge difference in the way these are made, but definitely the durability is going to be a peace of mind here, and just the fact that these are just a little bit wider I think is going to help the overall fitment. So I'm going to go ahead and complete the rebuild of this and get us back to where we were, and then we'll jump forward. All right, just a few notes on this swap. It was a little more finicky than I thought. For some reason I couldn't get one of the axles to slot into the gear with the diff all buttoned up here, so I removed that and then it just slid right in. I don't know what the deal was, and I did have to go to shorter screws with this metal housing. You can see these are the ones that I was using on the plastic, so I went to kind of the typical kind of stock length. It's a couple millimeters shorter than these, so those were able to fully seat. But again, I had to kind of back these off, especially these top two, little bit just to get that smooth rotation. It was getting a little binding if I had them all the way kind of, I didn't really crank them tight, I just had them tight and then kind of a little turn, but that was too much. So everything seems to be functioning great, and look at that CVD steering angle there on these Super 8s. So that's great. So I think I'm ready to get the servo on and get this back on the truck. Here we are with the front axle reattached to the chassis. So that is looking good, much more secure on that servo mount. Goes really nice with the brass knuckles, almost the same color. The knuckles are a little darker, but that looks really good. So I figure the next thing we need is wheels and tires. So of course we've got the original Mazz Designs raw finish double stars, and I've got the scale hardware on there, and these are on the 56mm Endura rock terrain crawler tires. These are the ones that look like Super Swampers. So I've got half of a Crawler Innovations foam in each of those, with the mediums in the back, softs in the front, and these are vented, the tire. So nice squish there, good bulge. I think these are 22mm wide. So my second choice was the RC 4-wheel drive IROC. And this guy is 58mm by 21. So again, about that same size, a little taller. And these are DJ Crawler wheels, and I think this is maybe a powder coated finish for this bright finish. So these have brass rings that are vented, and I put half of a Crawler Innovations foam in these as well. So these feel really nice. But my third choice, I kind of ran into a hiccup, and that was these Boom Racing Hustler Extreme MTs. So these are 60mm, so just a tad bit taller, but these have a like a 0.08 diameter hole in the middle instead of a 1, and they have a really thick bead, so you can stretch them around to 1.0, but the bead may make it or break it as far as being able to mount it. So that's exactly what happened with these little guy wheels. These brass rings, you can see kind of the play here. You've got kind of a little bit top and bottom, but not a lot when it's centered up. So not a lot of room there for a really thick bead. And then the difference here on these DJ Crawler, you can see on one side you get quite a bit of play. I can get that to focus in. So much more room to work a thick bead. And these are vented, so these are vented as well for the ring. So basically apples to apples. I think the offsets are both 0 on those. So again, that works well for the taller tire to sit it a little more inward to get out of the fenders rather than kicking it way out, so it really hooks into the fenders. So ended up mounting these guys to the DJ Crawler and doing the IROCs on the little guy racing. So these are 60 by like 18.7, a little narrower, a little taller. Feel really good. Again, a vented ring on those only, so just super nice finish on this polish. And these come with scale hubs, and from looking at these on the inside, these are brass threaded, so that is super nice. And they come with a little tool as well to install them. So may not have to use those Endura scale hubs at all. I'll just use these on all 3 sets when I rotate them. So that's the game plan right there. So I think I'm going to finish getting all these mounted up, and then we'll take a look with the body on and kind of those fender clearances I was working with. A couple notes here on these little guy racing brass hubs. So I've got these Super 8 CVD inners on the front, and for some reason these guys just want to bind up. Like, they'll start and then they just do not want to go. And so I've tried all of them the same thing. What's strange is they'll go right onto the rear by hand all the way. They'll thread onto just any random stock axles that I've pulled out to test. There's no issue. So I'm not sure what the deal is, but like where I've started it on the front and on that other side, I kind of ran it down further. It's like taking off all of the dark finish on the threads. So there is some kind of fitment issue, which is not a big deal. I've got some great alternates here. So these may work a lot better for the build. These are red locking hubs, scale locking hubs from SSD. So they don't come with the tool, but I already own some of these, so I've got a tool. So I think these may go on the front, and then I may still use these Injora because they do actually have a nylock nut in there, I believe, and they're capped, whereas these brass ones are open-ended. They're drilled all the way through, which is nice for some axles. I've got some portal axles that actually have a really long threaded extension, so like a normal scale hub cap won't even tighten down all the way, so those would work. So I may try those on something else and use this SSD and Jora combo for these guys, but just wanted to point that out. Very strange that you think that this would work with all of their own stuff. But anyways, I'm gonna get the rest of the stuff mounted up. Okay, here we are. Got all the wheels and tires mounted up. Before we look at those any closer though, I forgot to mention another strike against these little guy scale hubs. The tooltip adapter does not fit in the typical, hex driver. This is the RC four-wheel drive one. This fits like every hex nut I've ever tried. It fits all the hex adapters, for specialty hubs as well. So I don't know what the deal is. This like almost starts, but it won't go in, so boo. But luckily, I'm very happy with the alternative that I had on hand. So it's always a good idea to have a backlog of some scale hubs just for this similar type of crisis that may arise in any given build at any given time. Make sure you're scaled out. So this looks super sweet. And like I said, this is going to go really good with the color scheme to have that red locker in the front. But unfortunately, this only has 4 wheels, so I couldn't demo all 3 options. But here's the little guy. And this polish is nice. It's kind of a mirror polish, so you can see it looks darker depending on how the light hits it. There you go. You can kind of see right there on the front. So that's nice. So anyways, let's pop the body on here, and I did get some stickers on here. I went with sort of a sponsor truck. Let's see. Get this guy seated in the channels, and there we go. So you can see there, basically everything that's gone into the truck got a sticker, plus a few more. And I may not be done. I may have another little detail to add to this thing. So you'll notice this big hole in the front, and that of course is to get that full droop articulation there. So right now it looks like with the springs that are in there, I think these are the gold, it sits up, which is really not super high, but if I want to lower it or just on full articulation, that guy pokes through, and the servo edge basically bump stops right up here on the scoop, right at full compression of these shocks. So all of this stuff is things that I looked at with this still as a clear body. So the fenders again were a big thing. So it's always, you're always looking at full lock and then full compression. Let me get it turned here. I think that's full lock, and you can see here very close to the spring, but missing it with this one coming up. And then I'm just kissing the fender there, and then we'll look at this one as far as the front clearance. So this one again is, and it's getting into it a little, but this is a super soft tire, not super knobby, so I don't think that'll be an issue. So if we can turn it the other way and look at that interco, I rock. So I think that's full lock opposite. So we're not hitting the spring, and then we'll look, and we do get into the spring a little bit there, just barely at the top on full compression. And then the same thing, we're just kissing that fender. But again, this tread is not super knobby, and these are both incredibly soft. So It's a nice smooth cut, so I don't think that'll be any kind of issue. And then the rear, of course, is not near as hard. You just really have to take a look at your wheels and tires, you know, and clear at full compression. But both of these are making that no problem. So I could even go with larger tires. And I actually looked at some 65mm pins on this, and that would have just taken out so much fender. You can see I left kind of just a lip there on the front and the rear because I wanted that hint of that fender line. And then yeah, just kind of went with a racing theme here. Everything pretty much symmetrical minus the hood zone, of course. Had to throw a little humor there. But anyways, that's wheels, tires, and the body for the most part. So I think now all we have to do is make this thing roll forwards and backwards. So on to the electronics. Well, I didn't think it'd be fair to jump into electronics without demoing this third set here, which is the main set. So I've got the front mounted up, and I left the rear as the combo, but I just wanted to show this what I was messing with here. So a little dead drop in the rear, pretty well dampened, not much recoil or bounce from very low, basically not much at all. So let's look at the difference in this front end with the Injora compound. Look at how bouncy it is, just from a low, even at a low drop. So that's why it's good to have alternates. I'm assuming these Injora may not perform as well compound wise. They definitely look the most scale. Super set combo there with the wheel, but these definitely have such a much softer compound. So I mean, these have nice soft foams in them. It's just the stiffness of this rubber for sure. So little differences in the compound make a big difference in performance. And here we are. Look at that. That looks super sick. Man. Let's check the clearance here at the nose. So we're not touching there. And remember, these wheels do have a negative offset, so they stick out a little bit further. So that's why these tires have to be a little shorter. So let's flip this to the front. So again, it looks like that's just barely kissing the fender. At full compression, full lock, so everything checks out, and that looks super sick. So I think now we've got 4 matching wheels. Let's move on to electronics. Alright, so I got a big mess here. So as I was digging into the electronics, I came to a few realizations pretty quickly. One of those was just since all the time has passed between part 1 and 2, I've received my couple of Lizard Ultimates that I ordered. So I was thinking about potentially a lot of space savings and also just trying this guy out. So I'll show you the difference. So here's the Lizard Pro that I was planning on using. So it's got the external Bluetooth, which this one does not. It's built in. This one only comes with the receiver cable. It doesn't come with the battery extension cable like this one has. So I've got some of those where you can just plug a battery directly, but of course I'm going to be using a 3S with a JST, so I'm going to have to use a JST to whatever this little stock plug is, I forget the name. So looking at the Lizard Pro, it's a pretty nice setup here. 30 amp, 50 amp peak, and it's got a 5 volt, 6.5 volt BEC that's selectable at 2.5 amps. So not too bad. So with that, I was planning on running an 8.4 volt BEC, which with it comes wires, and I'd have to convert this 2S to 3S. So wires, weight, bulk, and a tiny chassis, pretty narrow side rails, and back tray. So this could be a big advantage. So the specs on this guy, it is 40 amp with a 70 amp peak and then 5 volt, 6.5 volt, and an 8.4 volt 3 amp BEC. So that right there takes this out of the equation totally. That's out of the equation. This is out of the equation. So now we're just looking at this, and the micro receiver, which is right here. So a lot less to deal with as far as cabling and routing and weight. So I think I'm going to go this direction. And looking at this, the second realization was I believe I'm going to have to reclock this motor to get these wires up off of this tray, because there's really nowhere for those to compress, and I really need the whole width. You see the screws here where I've got the links, they're up, so they actually protrude into that space. The front ones are mounted low enough so they're below the deck. So what that means basically is with this Pro, I'm gonna have to show it on this side. It's got the on-off at the back. What I'd like to do is basically butt it right up to the screw right there. So that way you can see there, it just misses the slot. So the body can miss it and slide into the little slot, and that's gonna fit perfectly right there. And that's got quite a bit more weight than the receiver, so that's gonna go down low. Of course, but I wanna put it right here, so these are in the way. So that's gonna get rotated where the wires are coming out, I guess at an angle up. And then that will leave me the battery to mount on this side. So the third realization was this battery is not very small. I think I meant to order maybe the 250 mAh instead of 300, because this is the 300 E-flite I've got. So in one dimension, it's basically, I think it's this one, it's basically the same, maybe just a hair wider. And then in this dimension, it's quite a bit wider either way. But this guy has a lot more length to it. So pros and cons to both of those. I thought I was going to be able to make this one work, but I'd have to get it high enough really to get it up over that screw. It's this guy again that's on this side on the rear links. So it's basically eating into that tray, that space, so it's going to push that battery outward and it gets into this little slot here. So I started really looking at this guy, and it's short enough that I can get it to miss that, and so I can get it tucked against the frame right there. So this may end up working just fine, and it's, you know, it's super tight, but I think I can get clearance to get the body in there. So then again, this is a lot of weight compared to anything else, so that's down low on the tray. So I think that's the plan for the battery, and I'm thinking just on some Velcro. I think that's how most people are doing it, without a battery strap. And then just to leave the micro receiver, which is super tiny and lightweight. So that's going to locate, I think, in the middle between everything. It may change if I can fit it somewhere else, but that's the game plan. So I think the first thing I've got to do is pull the motor, 3 screws in the transmission, lift it out, and be able to clock that motor. So I think that's the game plan. Hopefully this will go as planned, but I think cutting out all of this on a build that is this tight on space will help. Quick update here on the electronics. So I was able to pull that transmission and clock that motor. So I've got those wires up out of the way. Got the full usage of those trays all the way over to the slot. I've just got these screw heads in my way, but looks like this Lizard Ultimate is going to tuck in right there flush to the frame rail and to that screw head. And it, if I can hold this in here, you can see it clears the slot there on the side, just barely. I mean, it's right up to the edge. So that's going to work out as planned. And then you can see I've got these 2 batteries out here, and I got to really looking at how to mount these, and by raising this guy up a little bit, as you can see here, I've got a couple layers of double side under the Velcro that's able to get this up so that screw head can happen underneath this part of the battery here. So with that done, this long one is going to end up fitting in here easily. You can see it's up over that screw head, and I can figure out where exactly that feels like it's going to mount about right there, so I want to make sure I get this back far enough so you don't see the battery from the side, but that looks to give me plenty of room to that slot down the side. And then, you know, it's got the wire bulge just kind of on one side of the battery, so I definitely wanted that to the inside to keep this flat edge aligned out here to the body edge. But it should end up being something like that when it's all said and done, hopefully a little cleaner. And then, of course, the micro receiver is going to find a home there. So the good thing about that is this battery is actually a nicer battery. It's 45C discharge with a 90C burst, whereas this guy is only a 30C. I don't believe it tells a burst on here. The other difference is weight. So the smaller one actually weighs more, so it's 26.9. This is the larger one with all the Velcro and everything, and it weighs less at 24.9. So with that being opposite the motor, this already has some weight to this side, so adding some here is good. And then we're going to add a little more to the motor side, so 9.3 grams. .4 grams. So we're going to add that to the motor side, and then we'll put that right down the center at the back, 2.2. So hopefully with all of that added to the chassis, we're going to end up with close to 50-50 side to side weight. That's the goal, but we'll see. Well, look at that. Everything appears to have found its home, and it worked out really, really clean. Super, super clean. I'm really glad I switched to that Ultimate and ditched that BEC and all the wires. So let's look at the battery first. So that all worked out really well, sitting above that screw, tight against the frame rail. And then I did additionally notch out the front corner of this ESC tray for these wires that kind of exit over there, just so they can kind of sit on top of that frame rail. So I'll show a pic of that. And then in the center, I've got the micro receiver. So the bottom plug is actually the servo. So I've got the double-sided on the servo plug to the ESC tray. So that's what's sticking that down. And then you can see I ran a rubber band around it just for wire management of that servo cord. And it's just running along here, kind of along the bottom. So I had just enough space between the link and the drive shaft to run that rubber band without any interference below. And then I did a similar thing on the front with the servo to keep this wire pulled, you know, tight and routed over here. So that keeps that out of the way, it gives me full compression. So that worked out really nice for some more wire management. And then we flip over here to the Ultimate, and this thing just worked out super nice. I love that case. It fit in here perfectly. So with this, I swapped to a shorter ESC cable. The Lizards or the Lizard Pros used to come with like a shorty guy, and then they come with the typical longer, so you had an option. This Ultimate didn't, but I had some of these on hand, so you can see super short, just goes right there. And then I like to just use wires for wire management, so I've got the motor cables kind of twisted and looped. Same with the battery. It kind of loops under that ESC cable. And then battery connection is going to happen down here, nice and tucked in. All that's kind of rubber banded to the battery. So it keeps all the wires, you know, once they're plugged in, be nice and tucked. So that all seemed to work out really, really nicely. So I think I'm going to plug the battery in here and give it a little test. So fish this guy out. Get that plugged in, and then that can kind of just tuck back in there. So everything's nice and low. And then I finally figured out a good way to mount this body. You can kind of start one edge in the slot, and I guess now with the battery it pops into place pretty nicely. So can't see the battery from the side, so that worked out really nice. You go right down those trays, so that's what you're working with. And then you don't really have any wires sticking up, a little of that motor wire loom, but not too bad. And then of course I can access the button on the back. So I've already turned on and adjusted the Bluetooth for this Ultimate, so I've got it pumped up to 8.4, got my endpoints adjusted, obviously, because I don't want to break anything. Super powerful. So everything seems to be functioning just fine. Look at that creep. It's moving. Creep it up a little more. Talk about slow crawl. Let's get this up on the stand here. Let's get some juice on 3S. And it's got some super creep as well. Alright, so probably need to fully charge this brand new battery before I get any further. But I think now that we've got it all buttoned up, it's time to throw it on the scales and see how we ended up here. Alright, here we are. Moment of truth. Let's get these things zeroed out. And let's get our overall weight with battery. Look at that. Oh, come on, let's settle. Let's see if we can get a good settle here. Almost a 50-50 side to side, super close. That may just be dependent on the shocks settling. Look at that, there it is, 50-50 with almost a 60-40 front ratio. So you cannot beat that. That is awesome. So just straight off of the build, and that's with equally weighted wheels all the way around. So not too worried about weighing the other setups as well, because each wheel tire combo within the sets will weigh the same. So it's not going to change the bias. It may only change the overall weight by a few grams one way or the other. Let's flip over to ounces. So not too bad, 14.1 ounces. Not a super heavy rig, but definitely not an ultralight either. So that's good news. Here we are at the end of yet another build. And if you look closely, you'll see I snuck in one more little scale detail. So I got my plates on there. I figured cheater was a good vanity plate, and South Carolina is a nod to Mazz. Although I may have screwed that up. He may actually be in North Carolina. So if you watch this, Mazz, let me know in the comments if I screwed up the inside joke. But I think cheater is a pretty perfect plate for this. Went ahead and got one on the rear as well. So I think this thing is done and done. And man, I just could not be happier with it. Loving this red and white color combo. I think that is going to go great with kind of my blue and white and silver deadbolt race combo. It does complement each other pretty well. And I'm digging the livery here, all the sponsor graphics. I think that just looks awesome. So there's not a lot to do remaining except get this guy out and actually test it, throw on some of these different wheels and tires, see if I want to change the spring rate to lower it, add any limiting straps. But one thing I've been really cognizant of is this kind of the profile of that skid. And you can see if you fully drop this and slam it, you kind of have this transition right here, the frame rails. So I've got it sitting up a little more for a smoother transition right there, kind of how it is now on these springs. So it's really just going to take some driving and see how it performs, but definitely digging the peekaboo servo window right there. I think that's super sick. But big shout out to Mazz at Mazz Designs for coming up with just a really stellar chassis design and some great looking wheels as well. So I recommend picking up some of the black double stars since he no longer makes these raw finish, but just super great. And check out Mofo RC, Little Guy Racing as well. Just some great vendors, great products. But I think that's going to do it for this one. You know, thanks for coming along. Hope you learned something. I know I always do, and maybe this helped you out if you're going to embark on a cheat code build or jump into one of these cliffhanger bodies. But until next time, thanks for watching.